What's good? It's Woog. Shakur Stevenson's replacement opponent, instead of Frank Martin, looks like it's going to be Edwin de Los Santos. And I know that there were rumors of that shortly after Frank Martin pulled out of the fight, to a lot of people's disappointment. Shakur Stevenson was saying essentially that they were on the verge of setting up him versus Edwin de Los Santos. And for those of you who aren't familiar with de Los Santos, he was a relatively unknown until he became a late replacement, kind of a standby replacement to fight Jose Valenzuela, who was a surging prospect at the time. And Valenzuela was like a vicious knockout artist, still is. I mean, you saw his fight with Chris Colbert. That was Chris Colbert's latest opponent. Very controversial decision win for Colbert. But before that, Valenzuela, again, was on the upswing. De Los Santos from the Dominican Republic, again, was the B-side, a clear B-side in that fight. And he pretty much blitzed him, and not with a reckless lack of boxing IQ type of approach. No, this guy was a fast counterpuncher, and he's a southpaw. So Shakur Stevenson was about to fight a southpaw in Frank Martin. Edwin de Los Santos, still a southpaw. But Valenzuela had no idea how to handle de Los Santos's hand speed, combination punching, mixing up the punches to the body and up top. Even his like slick defensive style gave Valenzuela some issues, and he ended up stopping Valenzuela pretty early in that fight. That was a shock. Not because Valenzuela had like a long proven history of success. I mean, he was still a prospect, but if you looked at what the betting odds were at the time, that was one of the biggest upsets of the year. So then the question is, okay, was that an aberration? Was that de Los Santos kind of fighting the fight of his life, basically? Because he had lost earlier that year. He lost early 2022, just last year, against William Foster III. It was a split decision win for Foster. So it's not like de Los Santos hasn't been beaten before, although that is his only loss to date. And so he had that very impressive, surprising victory over Jose Valenzuela. But then we were bound to learn a lot in his next fight, which took place almost a year later. So he had like 9-10 months outside the ring. So a lot of people were thinking, oh, what happened to that de Los Santos guy we just saw stop Valenzuela? He's been pretty inactive since. Well, his next fight was going to teach us a lot, and that was against Joseph Adorno, who a couple years ago was a hot prospect himself. He has since fallen on pretty hard times. First with his, close loss, but competitive decision loss against Michel Rivera, who, tested positive for PED. So that puts a lot of things into question, right? In terms of Rivera's performances. It's just the way it is. But then Joseph Adorno had won his next 3 fights against lesser opponents. And then he fights Elvis Rodriguez, another prospect. Rodriguez beats Adorno. Adorno had a problem with the decision. I didn't, but Adorno didn't think that the fight was adjudicated fairly. But then his next fight, after that second loss, this time again to Elvis Rodriguez, the next fight was against Edwin de Los Santos. So it's like, okay, we're going to find out a lot more about de Los Santos, and we're going to see if Joseph Adorno is in fact like a threat in the division, or if he's clearly a cut below the elite and probably even the near elite. And this fight was non-competitive. Like, I had not seen Joseph Adorno getting beat this thoroughly, round after round after round. He wasn't able to make any adjustments, no effective adjustments at least. And Edwin de Los Santos looked like an elite fighter against Joseph Adorno. So maybe it could be one of a couple of things. Maybe Adorno is clearly past his prime, even though he's still young. Maybe he is already regressing. That's a possibility. All I know is Edwin de Los Santos looked remarkable in that fight, and it was with a different style than he used to defeat Jose Valenzuela. So maybe Joseph Adorno was expecting de Los Santos to be that more aggressive, just putting blistering combinations together type of fighter. So maybe he thought it was going to be more of a phone booth style fight, but Edwin de Los Santos was able to hit and not get hit. Like, this was a very clean boxing clinic, and he put some nice power behind some of his power punches when he would sit down on them. So that fight makes us, or forces us, to reevaluate Edwin de Los Santos. This wasn't just, or at least apparently wasn't just a blip on the radar where the guy had the fight of his life, and that is no accurate representation of what we could expect going forward. No, I would argue that his performance against Joseph Adorno was as impressive, but in a different way. But as impressive as his stoppage win over Jose Valenzuela. He didn't stop Joseph Adorno, but he did demoralize him, totally demoralized him, won just about every round of that fight. And that's where we sit with Edwin de Los Santos right now. So yes, it is disappointing that we're not getting Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin. And yes, this is a bad look. And until we hear something or a good reason why Frank Martin didn't follow through with the fight that he had at least reportedly agreed to, there's a lot we don't know. Because here's the thing, if there was an agreement, you would think that the things that were in place and already agreed upon would be the purse split, the venue, you would think that a lot of these more critical elements of making a fight were already agreed to. You don't have an agreement if the money isn't agreed to, in my opinion. So it would be bogus for a reporter, a journalist, to come out and say that a fight is agreed to if the money's not ironed out yet. So something is weird about this. Like, I don't know whether it was misreported and, they were not as far along in finalizing the deal as reported, or if it was agreed to and Frank Martin, in fact, changed his mind and decided to pull out of the fight. I don't know. We need more information on that one. But we're not getting that fight. It is a disappointment, but you can't be too mad at this replacement. This replacement might be just as difficult. I would have loved to have seen Frank Martin versus Edwin de Los Santos. I feel like, at least reputation-wise, Shakur Stevenson is believed to be more ready basically for that number one spot than these other guys who look like they might one day be ready. Maybe they're knocking on the door. We don't know. But I feel like Frank Martin and Edwin de Los Santos are about at the same level in terms of what they've proven. Because if you look at Frank Martin's best wins, who would they be against? Michel Rivera, who Frank Martin looked really good against. He won the vast majority of the rounds there. Jackson Marinez, that was a stoppage win for Frank Martin. Frank Martin didn't stop Michel Rivera, but he stopped Jackson Marinez. He knocked Romero Duno out before that. So those are probably his best wins, unless we'll see what Harutunian, that was the guy who Frank Martin fought last and really struggled with. On the unofficial scorecards, through 9-10 rounds, Frank Martin was down on the scorecards by a little bit. He scored a late knockdown, largely to save the day. Frank Martin really struggled with Harutunian, and it's like that sometimes. Sometimes you just fight a guy, and whether you underprepared for him or it was just a bad stylistic matchup, for whatever reason, Frank Martin had a lot of issues with Harutunian. But he did edge the fight. So I would say that, those are basically his best wins. Michel Rivera, Jackson Marinez, maybe Romero Duno, and then we'll see about Harutunian. Whereas with Edwin de Los Santos, again, it's Jose Valenzuela and then Joseph Adorno. So I would say that they are more close than Shakur Stevenson is. But again, I think a lot of people really wanted to see Stevenson against Martin. But, this is, again, going to be Southpaw versus Southpaw. Shakur Stevenson, appears to be just, on that Devin Haney level in terms of being a master at controlling range. Like Yoshino, his last opponent, was not able to get to him. Oscar Valdez was not really able to get to him. But it looks like at 135, I feel like even more so than, at 126, Shakur Stevenson appears to be sitting on his punches a little bit more. For me, it was first apparent. I thought that he was turning a corner power-wise when he fought Felix Caraballo. That was in, I believe, the COVID 2020 year. But then obviously when he beat up on Jamel Herring and stopped him, it was damn, okay, so Shakur Stevenson does have a good amount of pop. So, we'll see what we get. I can't wait to dive into this one a lot more analytically and do a full breakdown as we near the fight date. It looks like, I think the fight's taking place in November. But it looks like the fight is, the step before becoming official. I think they're at the finalized stage, although I think the fight is supposed to take place in Las Vegas, and yeah, I believe it's a November fight date, but correct me if I'm wrong. Also, let me know what you expect to see between Shakur Stevenson and Edwin de Los Santos. Who's got the hand speed advantage here? Because I feel like if you look at a lot of Shakur Stevenson's opponents, I don't think any of them are showing the sharpness, just in terms of the reflexes, the explosiveness. I know Oscar Valdez has a crazy explosive left hook. He could crack for sure. But I'm saying, as far as being able to kind of jump in and let a couple quick punches go, get out, I guess, Robson Conceição had a lot of that. And you saw that with Conceição against Oscar Valdez. So that might have been the sharpest, maybe quickest, opponent for Shakur Stevenson. I know Nakatila is able to throw a pretty fast and hard right hand, but Jamel Herring wasn't really a burner when it came to hand speed. So it'll be interesting to see, Shakur Stevenson fight somebody who appears to be, an A-level athlete, if we're, to take those last two performances for Edwin de Los Santos at face value. So what makes this one kind of interesting is that we're getting an evolving Edwin de Los Santos. Just based on the relatively small sample size, I do want to look at more of his fights. I saw his split decision loss against William Foster. I saw the fight that he had before Jose Valenzuela. But yeah, I want to do a deeper dive into, what his weak spots are. Okay, so, he got knocked down in that fight against Jose Valenzuela. So it's not like the hurt from one boxer to another was one-way traffic. No, he got dropped as well, but he came back and recovered pretty quickly, and it wasn't too long after that he hurt Jose Valenzuela. It was pretty immediate. So yeah, I can't wait to take a deeper look at this one. And I believe that De Los Santos has a slight reach advantage here. So De Los Santos is listed at, I believe, 5'8", might be 5'9", but I think he's 5'8". Shakur Stevenson used to be listed at 5'7". Maybe they've graduated that to 5'8". You see that sometimes in a fighter's career. Like, for a lot of their career, they're at one height, like 5'7". Before you know it, they're listed at like 5'8". I saw it with Shane Mosley, saw it with Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think we're seeing it right now with Devin Haney. But I would like to see what they look like in a face-off, just height-wise between Stevenson and De Los Santos. And again, reach-wise, unless Shakur Stevenson's, got another inch or inch and a half in reach, I believe De Los Santos has a slight reach advantage. But a lot of these measurements are non-scientific. It's not an across-the-board thing in terms of where they're getting some of these numbers from. So sometimes you might see that a fighter is listed at a certain height relative to another fighter, and then when you see them in the ring together or in the press conferences and face-offs, you're like, yeah, that's not accurate. Case in point, Roman Villa, the guy who just lost to Boots Ennis and had beaten Rashidi Ellis just before that. I remember they were listing Rashidi Ellis, I believe, as being at the same height or maybe even taller than Roman Villa. And, you saw them. As soon as you saw them, you're like, damn, these guys don't even look like they belong in the same division. That's how much bigger Roman Villa looked than Rashidi Ellis. So, yeah, I just need to see Shakur Stevenson standing next to Edwin de Los Santos. But, yeah, let me know what your initial thoughts are. If I was to just kind of give my gut feeling right now on this one, I think that De Los Santos is going to, I think he's going to be cooking somewhat early in the fight. Like, he's a pretty fast starter. I don't think he's going to be able to establish nearly the control against Shakur Stevenson, obviously, that he was against Joseph Adorno. But I think that he's going to try to get that fast right-hand jab going. Shakur Stevenson, I imagine, is going to be doing something similar. You know what would be very impressive is if Shakur Stevenson puts his foot on the gas kind of early and just puts a beating on De Los Santos early to prove a point or to make a statement in the way that he did early in the fight against Jamel Herring. That would be pretty damn impressive. But I expect this one to be a little bit slower to cook because neither guy wants to run into the other person's counter punches. And again, both of these guys are pretty explosive, and Edwin de Los Santos mixes up the attack high and low. Now, it's easier to mix the attack up high and low when you're fighting a slower-handed, slower reflex type of opponent who's not as dangerous a counterpuncher. If you come in on Shakur Stevenson, he's going to check you with something. So I don't think Edwin de Los Santos is going to come out guns blazing. I just really wonder what those first couple of rounds are going to look like. But I'd imagine, just given the pedigree, given the reputation, given the experience with guys like Terrence Crawford and so forth, you would think that by the fourth and fifth round, Shakur Stevenson should start pulling away just from a sweet science standpoint and landing the cleaner shots to where Edwin de Los Santos is having difficulty finding Shakur Stevenson. That's just reputation-wise what I think we're led to believe, given these guys' histories to this point. But I also wouldn't be surprised if Shakur Stevenson is able to hurt De Los Santos. Again, De Los Santos was dropped by Valenzuela, who does have significant punching power. But yeah, I mean, if I had to guess right now, and again, I'm going to do a deeper dive and issue more of an analysis down the line, but Shakur Stevenson via decision is how I would play this one. I think he will find a way to figure out a way how to outbox De Los Santos. Like, that's what my gut is telling me. Let me know what your first thoughts are on Shakur Stevenson versus Edwin De Los Santos. And when they announced this one, do you feel like it was a letdown? Were you disappointed by this fight announcement? Or were you like, damn, I would have really liked to have seen, I would have loved to have seen him fight Frank Martin, but I'm not mad at this Edwin De Los Santos matchup. Is that how you're feeling about this one? And as it stands right now, has your opinion on Frank Martin changed since Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin is no longer? To me, it also seems like the fighters at the lightweight division, you know, the ones who, especially who don't want to fight Shakur Stevenson, and it's been a few of them now. It's William Zepeda who passed it up. Isaac Cruz passed it up. Vasily Lomachenko went back to Ukraine, doesn't plan on getting back in the ring for the rest of 2023. I suspect he's going to be fighting George Kambosos, I think, for an IBF belt. That's my guess. Whereas I'm expecting Isaac Cruz to challenge Gervonta Davis for a share of the WBA belt. So I'm kind of looking at a lot of the lightweight fighters who seem to want to steer clear, at least that's what it appears, right? Want to steer clear of Shakur Stevenson. I think that they're going to find other opportunities to challenge for a title. And I'm thinking, you know, Frank Martin, for him to pull out of this one, he must have either gotten some assurance or something, some idea that maybe he could compete either against Gervonta Davis for that WBA belt, or, you know, against somebody else for what will be the vacant WBO belt, one of the 4 belts that Devin Haney will be relinquishing as he moves up to 140. So that part's a little silly and frustrating just for a fight fan, seeing, you know, fighters methodically kind of dodge the path of most resistance to take a path of lesser resistance on the way to a title. I mean, I get it from a career management standpoint. You'd rather fight somebody that you could beat than not. And if you have to go through Shakur Stevenson to earn a share of the WBC title, why not fight either Gervonta Davis if you're going to get way more money, if that's the case. We'll see where Frank Martin, what the deal is with Frank Martin. But I would get it if he gets a fight with Gervonta Davis. It's like, go get your paper, and you're probably going to be competing for that full WBA lightweight title. Yeah, go do that. Or if he's going to be fighting like a easier opponent for the WBO title, I see that as being one of the 2 cases that you would at least understand from a career management standpoint. Say, okay, but if that's the case, you would still like you don't like the sound of somebody agreeing to a fight. But this goes back to, what is an agreement? What does that consist of? What parts of the fight were actually established? You know what I mean? So yeah, let me know your thoughts on the lightweight division, on Frank Martin, on Shakur Stevenson versus Edwin De Los Santos in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.